She was already crying when I walked in. Not soft crying. The kind where you think someone might be hurt. I'd been gone maybe 40 minutes. I came back to find Danny sitting on the kitchen floor, with her back against the cabinet, knees pulled to her chest, a FaceTime call still running on the counter above her. The other end silent. I didn't ask what happened. I just sat down next to her on the tile, and we stayed there until the call screen went dark on its own. That was October. By December, she would do something that made me rethink everything I thought I understood about people who say they've sworn off love. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because you need to understand what Danny was before you understand what she became, and what she became cost her something first. Danny moved in 2 years ago with 1 duffel bag, 3 houseplants, and a complete absence of sentimentality about any of it. She had driven 6 hours from her hometown with everything she owned and seemed mildly inconvenienced by the fact that she'd had to park twice. No ceremony. No nostalgia. She carried things from the car to the apartment with the focused efficiency of someone moving office supplies, not their whole life. "Which room is mine?" she said, not as a question. I told her, and she disappeared into it, and 20 minutes later she came back out and started making tea like she'd lived there for years. I thought, this person is going to be easy to live with. I was right about that, and completely wrong about everything else. Dani worked in data analytics. She was genuinely excellent at it, the kind of excellent that doesn't announce itself. It just becomes visible over time through small things, like the way she'd notice a pattern in something you'd said 3 weeks ago and reference it precisely. She remembered things. Not in a showy way, in a quiet, accumulative way that meant you sometimes felt, around Dani, like someone was actually keeping track. She had a theory about love. She'd held it for long enough that it had stopped being a theory and become a kind of operating principle. "It's a story people tell themselves," she said one night, not bitterly, with the same tone she might use to explain a data quirk. "It works until it doesn't, and then the story collapses, and people act surprised. I'd rather just not start the story." "What happened to make you think that?" I asked. She looked at me calmly. "Nothing dramatic." "That's the point. Dramatic would be easier. I just watched enough people I loved lose themselves inside someone else, and then lose that someone else, and become someone smaller than they were before. I didn't want to shrink. I didn't push it. You learned quickly with Danny that a closed door wasn't always locked. Sometimes it just needed time. The October floor night, it turned out, was her college best friend Marcus, not a breakup. Something harder to name. She and Marcus had been close for 8 years. The kind of close where you maintain a friendship across distance and time zones and life phases with no apparent effort, where checking in feels like breathing. She'd flown to see him twice in the past year. He'd called her from the hospital when his father had a procedure. She was the person he'd told first when he got engaged. The FaceTime that went dark on the counter was him canceling the engagement trip he and his fiancée had been planning with Danny. The reason was the fiancé. Apparently she'd felt for some time that Danny occupied too much space in Marcus's emotional life. The conversation on the counter had ended with Marcus saying he needed to put his relationship first, and Danny saying she understood, which she did, and then the screen going dark, which she didn't. I asked her if she wanted to talk about it. "Not really," she said. "I'm not sad. I'm just recalibrating." That was Danny's word for grief. She recalibrated quietly. She went to work, came home, cooked elaborate dinners she didn't make a fuss about, watched documentaries about deep-sea creatures with an expression of pure contentment. She got through November the way she got through most things, by being fundamentally fine in a way that made you wonder if she was. I noticed the one new thing. She'd started running in the evenings, not for fitness. She wasn't tracking it. She'd just appear in running shoes around 8 o'clock, go out for 40 minutes, come back flushed, and quieter in a way that was different from her regular quiet. More settled, like she'd worked something through. I found out why in December by accident, when I couldn't sleep and went to make tea at 1:45, and found her sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop, working, across from a man I'd never seen before who was also working, and neither of them seemed surprised that I'd appeared, and neither of them seemed to feel the need to explain the situation. His name was Joel. He lived in the building. He'd moved in on the 4th floor 3 months ago. We met running, Danny said, with total composure, and went back to her screen. Joel nodded at me in a perfectly friendly way, also went back to his screen. I made my tea. I went back to bed. I lay awake for a while thinking about what I'd just seen, which was 2 people at midnight, being completely natural and comfortable with each other in a way that takes time to build, and neither of them had mentioned. Here is what I found out over the next several weeks. In pieces, the way you find things out about Donnie, not through one conversation, but through accumulation. They'd met in early September, before the Marcus call, before October, which meant she'd been running with someone for 3 months without mentioning it once. Not because she was hiding it. Because she genuinely hadn't processed it as something that needed announcing. They ran. They talked. They ran. She helped him navigate a complicated situation with his building lease. His landlord had tried to renegotiate the terms of his agreement after move-in, claiming the signed contract contained an error in the rent figure, which was legally dubious at best and possibly actionable. Danny had looked at his lease, calmly, and explained exactly what his rights were under the Tenant Protection Ordinance, and which agency he should contact, and what documentation he should pull together. She'd done it the way she did everything, efficiently, without drama, without making it seem like a favor. He'd pushed back on his landlord. The lease stood. She didn't have to do that, he told me later, during one of the evenings where he was just there, the way he now was, regularly. I barely knew her. She read the whole thing, flagged 3 clauses. That's how she shows she likes you, I said. She solves your problems. He got quiet in a way that told me he already knew that, and had been thinking about it. The December thing, the thing that actually undid Danny, happened on the 14th. I know the date because she told me afterward, and I wrote it down. That sounds strange, but it isn't. She asked me to, in her precise way, because she said she wanted to be honest with herself about exactly when it happened. Which was so entirely Danny that I didn't question it. What happened was small. The smallness is the whole point. Joel knocked on the door at 11:45 at night. He'd been at a work event, and he looked tired in the way of someone who'd spent several hours being socially adequate and had reached the end of that. He wasn't there because anything was wrong. He hadn't texted first. He'd just come. Donnie opened the door. He looked at her. He said, "I just wanted to see you before midnight." That was it. That was the whole thing. Danny told me later, told me in the particular way she told me things she was still working out, which was standing in the kitchen doing something with her hands, not quite making eye contact, that she'd stood in the doorway for what felt like a long time, though it was probably 4 seconds, and felt something in the theory crack. Not collapse. Crack, the way something does when it's been holding weight it was never built to hold, and finally something light enough to go through it finds the fault line. It wasn't the declaration, she said. It wasn't romantic in a capital R way. He just prioritized me. In a small, uncomplicated, unremarkable way, he just wanted to be there before midnight. She set down whatever she was doing with her hands. I don't know how to explain why that was the thing. I just know it was. She let him in. They sat at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning, not working this time, just talking. I know because I heard them through my door, the low murmur of two people discovering they have more to say than they'd planned for. The kind of conversation that starts with nothing and gets somewhere real by accident. I don't know what they talked about. That's theirs. What I know is that around 2:15, I heard the front door, and then her bedroom door, and then quiet. The next morning she was in the kitchen before me, making tea with her back to the door, and when she heard me come in, she said, without turning, "Don't." I said, "I'm not saying anything." "Good," she said. But she was smiling. I could hear it. Somehow, the thing about people who've built a life around not needing love is that they haven't actually built a life around not needing love. They've built a life around not wanting to be diminished by it. Those are two entirely different architectures. Donnie's theory was never "I don't want to love anyone." It was, "I don't want to lose the best parts of myself inside someone else." And for years, those two positions had looked identical from the outside, which let the theory stay intact without being tested. What Joel had walked through the door at 11:45 was not a declaration. It was evidence that the two positions were not identical. You can want someone and remain full. You can be prioritized and not become smaller. You can let someone in at midnight and still be, the next morning, entirely yourself. Donnie already knew this, theoretically. She's brilliant. She'd have been able to argue it in the abstract. But the body learns differently than the mind. And what the body learned on the 14th was, this is what it feels like when someone simply shows up. And it doesn't cost you anything. I should tell you what happened with Marcus, because it connects. He reached out in January. A short message. He'd been thinking about the call in October, and about how it had ended, and he wanted to say he thought he'd handled it badly. Not the decision itself, which he still believed was right, but the way he'd closed the door. He said he hoped the distance didn't become permanent. Danny read it in the kitchen, standing up, phone in hand. She put the phone down. She picked it up again. She replied. It was 2 sentences. She didn't show me what they said, and I didn't ask. But after she put the phone away, she made 2 cups of tea instead of 1, and when I came in, she handed me the second cup and said, with no preamble, "I think I've been confused for a long time about what protecting yourself actually means." I waited. I thought it meant not getting close enough to lose things. But I lost Marcus anyway. I lost him because I'd made him feel like the door only opened one way. She wrapped her hands around her mug. That's not protection. That's just pre-losing things and calling it strategy. The thing Donnie was telling me, and the way Donnie tells things, oblique and precise at the same time, was that she'd been wrong. Not wrong to protect herself. Wrong about what protection looked like. Wrong that distance was the architecture of safety. Wrong that the cost of letting someone close was always, inevitably shrinking. She hadn't learned this from Joel. She'd always almost known it. Joel was just the moment when almost knowing became knowing. By February, they were doing the thing that people do when they're together, but haven't said they're together. The thing where the shape of a life rearranges quietly around a person without anyone naming it. He cooked on Tuesdays. She had a key to his place because of a package situation that got resolved, but the key stayed. They had the kind of in-jokes that form fast when two people pay close attention to each other, the specific and untranslatable shorthand of people who've been looking. I asked Danny once, because I couldn't help it whether she'd told him about the theory. "Yes," she said. "What did he say?" She smiled, the private kind. "He said data changes conclusions." I thought about that for a while. It's the most Danny love story there could possibly be. A woman who'd built a proof against love, having the proof revised by evidence. Not swept away. Not transformed into someone else. Just shown a data point she hadn't included in the model. Here's what I want to say about the midnight moment, because I've thought about it a lot since the 14th. The reason it worked, the reason it cracked the theory where years of other moments hadn't, wasn't chemistry or timing or any quality particular to Joel. It was the specificity. He didn't do something grand. He didn't arrive with a speech or a plan. He arrived with a small, particular, unmistakable statement of priority. I wanted to see you before midnight. The implication of which was not you are the most important person in my life, which would have alarmed her, but rather you were on my mind specifically enough, and I trusted our dynamic enough, and I thought you might actually want to see me too, and so I came. Specific. Unguarded. No performance. Danny had spent years watching people perform love loudly and then disappear. What she'd never quite believed in was love that announced itself quietly and then simply continued, unchanged, the next morning. The 14th was the first time she'd actually been inside a moment where that version existed. You can't argue someone into believing that version is real. You can only be it. I think about the people I know who've sworn off love, and there are more of them than you'd expect. And they are, almost always, the most careful and perceptive ones. And I think the thing they've sworn off is not love, but a particular experience of love that made them smaller. Which is reasonable. That experience exists. It happens. The problem is that swearing off the experience also forecloses the other version, which is subtler and less cinematic and therefore easier to miss. The other version doesn't sweep you off your feet. It shows up at 11:45 and wants to see you before midnight. It lets you stay yourself. It waits for you to be ready, and it doesn't make a scene about the waiting. Danny wasn't wrong to protect herself. She was wrong to believe that protection and love were incompatible. That's the only mistake she made, and it was a big one, and Joel, not through any grand romantic gesture, but through consistent, quiet specificity, gave her enough evidence to revise it. That's the whole story. It fits in a kitchen, a hallway, a running route, a FaceTime screen going dark. It doesn't have a wedding. It doesn't have a speech. It has two people working at a kitchen table at midnight, and one of them being willing to let the theory be wrong. If you've ever been the person who swore off something because you'd been hurt by the version of it that asks too much, and found yourself quietly revising that oath because someone showed you a different version, a smaller and more honest one, tell me about it below. Or maybe there's someone in your life you've kept at arm's length because you assumed closeness had the same price it's always had before, and you're just now wondering if that assumption is still true. I want to know. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. We tell the quiet stories here, the ones without big speeches that still somehow change everything.